What happens when a TV host pushes too far and her guest refuses to play nice? One question sparks a war of words live on air. Joy Behar tries to humiliate Senator John Kennedy, but he turns every jab into a comeback that shakes the studio. One live interview turns into a verbal showdown that leaves Joy Behar speechless. The studio buzzed with that familiar mix of chatter and anticipation. Joy Behar smiled, not kindly, more like a cat who'd already spotted the mouse. Our next guest, she began turning toward the camera, is a man who mistakes headlines for heroism. The audience laughed on cue, but there was an edge in the air, the kind that says people weren't sure if they were laughing with her or at him. Joy glanced toward the stage, eyes glinting. Please welcome Senator John Kennedy. Kennedy walked in slowly, not sluggish, but deliberate. His expression was calm, his posture easy. He nodded once to the crowd, once to the panel, then took his seat beside Joy. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The quiet confidence in his eyes did the talking for him. Joy crossed one leg over the other, papers in hand, and leaned forward just enough to look casual, but not friendly. So, Senator, she started, her tone syrupy but sharp. Do you believe your humor hides the lack of depth? The crowd murmured, half in amusement, half in tension. Kennedy didn't blink. If depth means drowning in nonsense, he said, his southern drawl wrapping around every word like velvet over steel. I'll stay shallow, thank you. The laughter that followed wasn't polite. It was real. Joy's smile faltered for a split second before she forced it back into place. She wasn't expecting that. She tried to recover, glancing at her notes, but Kennedy's calm silence filled the room more than her next line ever could. Joy chuckled tightly, eyes narrowing. You've got quite the answer for everything, don't you? She said. I guess that works better when no one's fact-checking. Kennedy leaned back slightly, the picture of ease. Oh, I'm sure they will, he replied. The trick is saying something true enough to survive the check. The audience reacted again. Some clapped, some just watched, sensing that something bigger was brewing. Joy looked toward the camera, smiling wider now, masking the frustration behind her eyes. Well, she said, this is going to be fun. Kennedy's reply was low, but cutting. That depends, ma'am. Are we talking fun for the truth or for the ratings? The laughter that erupted this time wasn't hers to control. The first spark of the battle had been lit. Joy leaned forward, her patience thinning. The polite smile she wore at the start had faded into something sharper, colder. You mock colleagues, you turn pain into punchlines, she said, her tone clipped, every word measured like a jab. Is that leadership or just laziness dressed up as charm? The studio fell still, the kind of quiet where you could hear someone's bracelet jingle in the audience. Kennedy looked at her, not irritated, not defensive, just calm, like he'd already seen this punch coming a mile away. He took a slow breath, leaned toward the mic, and said evenly, If truth hurts, maybe it's not my joke that's cruel. Maybe it's your comfort that's fragile. The words landed like a slap wrapped in silk. The audience reacted before Joy could, half gasped, half clapped. Even one of the co-hosts shifted awkwardly, trying not to smile. Joy blinked hard, her jaw tightening. Oh, that's cute, she said quickly, forcing a laugh. You practiced that one in the mirror. Kennedy tilted his head slightly, a small smirk ghosting his lips. No, ma'am, he said. You invited me for a circus. Sorry if I brought a mirror instead. The crowd exploded. Some laughed, some cheered, a few booed, but every eye in the room was glued to the stage. Joy froze for just a moment. The kind of pause you can't rehearse. The camera caught it all. The flash of frustration, the tightening around her mouth, the flicker in her eyes when she realized he'd taken the room from her. 3 seconds of silence stretched like 3 minutes. Kennedy didn't gloat. He simply sat back, hands folded, the picture of composure. The control room must have been losing its mind. But in the studio, only one thing mattered. The balance had shifted. Joy Behar, the queen of quick comebacks, had just been outplayed on live TV, and the audience knew it. Joy straightened in her chair, trying to reclaim the upper hand. Her voice turned sharper, dripping with sarcasm that barely hid the irritation underneath. "So now you're the savior of truth?" "Please," she said, shaking her head with a mocking smile. "You twist words better than most twist lies." The audience let out a collective, "Ooh," sensing another swing coming. Kennedy didn't flinch. He met her gaze, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. Too calm, too confident. "Funny," he said, his tone smooth but cold enough to cut through the air. "I thought twisting words was the network's job." The studio erupted in gasp and laughter. Even Whoopi glanced up from her cue cards, eyebrows raised like she couldn't decide whether to step in or let the chaos play out. Joy blinked, caught off guard again, then forced a chuckle that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned closer, lowering her voice but sharpening it to a blade. "This isn't your Senate hearing, Senator," she snapped. "You can't filibuster your way out of facts." Kennedy leaned in too. Not aggressive, just steady, like a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. "No need to," he said, his voice even almost quiet, but heavy enough to silence the room. "Facts have a habit of standing, while opinions like yours fall over in applause." The audience reacted instantly. Some clapped, others gasped, and a few just sat frozen, not sure if they were watching a debate or a public execution. Joy's smirk vanished. She opened her mouth to fire back, but the words stalled, trapped somewhere between anger and disbelief. Kennedy didn't press further. He just leaned back, hands folded, eyes steady, letting the silence finish what his words had already done. The crowd felt it. He wasn't just answering her anymore. He was dismantling her. One calm sentence at a time. Joy's smile had vanished by now. What started as playful banter had turned into a tug of war. She was clearly losing. Her voice sharpened, frustration seeping through every syllable. "You talk slow because you think it sounds wise," she snapped, her hands gesturing in irritation. "It doesn't." "It sounds old," the crowd murmured. Some laughed nervously, others exchanged glances. It was the kind of jab that went too far and everyone felt it. Kennedy didn't move for a moment. He just looked at her, calm and steady, like a man waiting for the echo to die before speaking. Then he leaned closer to the mic, his tone low but firm, his southern drawl carrying the weight of every quiet room he'd ever commanded. "Down where I come from, ma'am," he said slowly, every word landing like a hammer wrapped in velvet. "We talk slow so lies don't slip out. You might try it sometime." The audience exploded. Applause, whistles, even a few cheers. The sound rolled through the studio like thunder. Joy's face flushed red as she forced a tight smile, but the tension around her eyes betrayed her. The camera caught it, the kind of flash that no amount of media training could hide. Sarah tried to cut in, her voice tentative. "All right, let's, keep things civil, folks." But Kennedy wasn't finished. His tone stayed calm, even kind, but the words hit harder than any shout could. "I didn't come here to sound smart," he said, looking from Joy to the camera. "I came here to sound real. But I guess that's offensive in a world addicted to pretending." The applause returned, louder this time, echoing with the sound of shifting loyalties. Joy's practiced composure cracked just slightly. The studio lights seemed harsher now, the air thicker. Kennedy didn't gloat. He just sat back again, the picture of composure, while Joy Behar, the queen of control, suddenly looked like she was the one under questioning. Joy could feel the floor slipping from under her. Every comeback had backfired. Every smirk had turned into a grimace. She straightened her back, the familiar fire returning to her voice, desperate but still defiant. "You think being blunt makes you brave?" she said, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "It just makes you reckless?" The audience stirred, sensing she was swinging her last punch. Kennedy didn't rush to reply. He rose slightly from his chair, posture tall, eyes fixed on the camera rather than Joy, as if he was talking to the people at home, not the person in front of him. "Reckless?" he said evenly, is pretending you're brave behind a cue card. I speak without one. The crowd erupted, whistles, claps, a few shouts of, "That's it," echoing through the studio. Even Whoopi raised her eyebrows, her hand half covering a grin. Joy blinked, stunned for a moment, then forced herself to recover. "You're just performing honesty," she shot back, her voice tighter now, almost pleading for control. The laughter in the room died down just enough for Kennedy's reply to land crystal clear. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "No, ma'am," he said softly, steady as a heartbeat. "I'm just not afraid to sound wrong in a world obsessed with sounding right." The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that makes a whole room forget to breathe. Joy's lips parted, but no words came. Kennedy held her gaze for a beat longer, then looked back toward the crowd, his expression unreadable, but his presence overwhelming. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a checkmate, and everyone in the room knew it. Joy sat frozen in her chair, the tension in the studio so thick it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. The applause lights weren't needed anymore. The crowd was alive on its own. Every eye was locked on her, waiting for the next blow, waiting to see if she'd swing back or fold. Her smile twitched at the corners, that TV smile that had carried her through 1,000 interviews. But now it looked brittle, almost painful. The cue cards in her hands shook slightly, her fingers digging into them until the paper creased. She forced a breath and tried to speak, but nothing came out. It wasn't that she didn't have words. It was that none of them would sound strong enough now. Kennedy didn't move right away. He didn't have to. The silence was doing the work for him. When he finally leaned forward, his voice dropped to that calm, measured tone that had turned every insult into ammunition. "You called me a joke," he said, his draw slow, deliberate. "But a joke's only funny until it tells the truth." The line cut through the room like a blade through glass. Gasps, then a wave of sound. The audience rising to their feet, clapping, shouting, the kind of chaos that cameras can't contain. Someone in the back yelled, "Say it again!" and laughter broke through like thunder. Joy blinked fast, still smiling, but her eyes told a different story. Cornered, shaken, exposed. Kennedy waited for the noise to settle. He didn't smirk, didn't move to claim victory. He simply turned his head toward her, steady, unflinching. "In this room, Miss Behar," he said quietly, "I didn't outtalk you. You just ran out of things to believe the studio went still." The sound man forgot to breathe. The control room, usually a storm of voices, fell completely silent as every producer stared at the monitors, realizing they were watching television history happen in real time. The camera zoomed in tight on Joy's face, her smile gone now, her jaw tense, her eyes glistening just slightly under the lights. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Kennedy's expression didn't change. He looked composed, grounded, like a man who had come to fight with truth instead of volume. Joy's hands trembled as she set her chords down, her gaze dropping before she forced it back up. But when she met his eyes, there was no more power left to project. The audience, still on their feet, began to chant softly, "Kennedy, Kennedy," the sound building into something raw and electric. The red studio light blinked, signaling the end of the segment, but no one moved to cut. Kennedy broke the moment with a quiet breath. "The thing about truth, ma'am," he said, just loud enough for the mic to catch it, "is that it doesn't need applause. It just needs the courage to be said." He leaned back slowly, folding his hands on the table. The crowd roared again, this time not just clapping. They were standing, shouting, filming, cheering. Joy stayed seated, her face frozen in that strange mix of disbelief and forced grace. Her mind no doubt racing for a way out, but the moment had already chosen its winner. The camera caught everything. Kennedy still calm under the heat of the lights, Joy silent in her own spotlight. It was more than a debate. It was a dismantling, a televised reckoning. And when the director finally whispered, "Cut," the sound barely registered. Because the story had already written itself. The red light above the camera stayed on longer than it should have, as if no one in the control room wanted to be the one to end it. Joy sat frozen, staring down at her notes, flipping through blank cue cards as if searching for a line that could save her. Her lips parted once, an instinct to close the show, but no words came. The tension was too thick, the silence too heavy. The queen of sharp talk had finally run out of script. Whoopi glanced around the table, then cleared her throat, stepping into the void. "All right," she said, with that dry, knowing tone that could reset a room. "We're going to wrap it there." The audience laughed softly at first, like an exhale after holding their breath too long. Kennedy looked up, gave Whoopi a polite nod, and turned toward the crowd. He didn't stand up, didn't wave his arms like a man celebrating victory. Instead, he leaned toward the mic and spoke in the same calm, steady voice that had carried him through the storm. "It's not about sides," he said, his tone sincere, quiet enough that people had to lean in to hear. "It's about saying what you mean, even when it cost you applause." The words hung in the air for a beat before the audience reacted. No whooping, no chaos, just the kind of applause that starts small and grows heavier with meaning. It wasn't noise, it was acknowledgement. Even Joy, still sitting stiff in her chair, lifted her head just enough to look at him, her expression unreadable, but her silence saying what pride wouldn't. When the cameras finally cut, Kennedy stood, shook a few hands, and walked toward the exit. The applause followed him, softer now, more human than performative. No music played, no producers rushed in, just the sound of real clapping, honest and slow. He didn't smile for the cameras on the way out. He just nodded once to the audience before disappearing behind the curtain. Within minutes, the clip hit the internet, edited, shared, replayed, dissected. The caption spread faster than any headline could have predicted. Joy tried to roast him. He turned the fire into light. Millions watched, not just for the clash, but for the quiet that followed. The moment when the noise stopped and one man's calm turned into power. And in that silence, Kennedy didn't look like a politician or a performer. He looked like something rarer, a man who meant every word he said. As the screen faded to black, the studio still humming with the echo of applause, the narrator's voice came in, steady, low, and deliberate. In a world that rewards noise over truth, sometimes the quietest voice hits the hardest. If this moment made you stop, think, or feel something real, don't just scroll past it. Share it. Talk about it. Let people hear what honesty sounds like when it doesn't back down. A brief pause, then the final line hit clean and direct. Subscribe for more moments that prove courage still has a voice, and it's not afraid to.